Heroes are an inspiring group of people. Every one of them, from the larger-than-life comic book heroes you see on the big silver screen to the everyday heroes that let us live the privileged lives we do. Every hero has a story to tell. The doctor saving lives at your local hospital, the war veteran down the street who risked his lives for our freedom, the police officers and firefighters who risk their safety to ensure ours. Every hero is special and every story worth telling, but there is one class of heroes that I think is often ignored. The entrepreneur, the creator, the producer, the ones who look at the problems in this world and think to themselves, you know what? I can fix that. I can help people, and I can make a difference. Then they go out and do exactly that by creating a new product or introducing a new service. Some go on to change the world, others make a world of difference to their customers. Welcome to The Hero Show. Join us as we pull back the masks of the world's finest heropreneurs and learn the secrets to their powers, their success, and their influence, so you can use those secrets to attract more sales, make more money, and experience more freedom in your business. I'm your host, Richard Matthews, and we are on in 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome back to The Hero Show. My name is Richard Matthews, and I'm live on the line with Joel Hawbaker. Joel, are you there?
I'm here.
Awesome. Glad to have you here. Joel, where are you coming in from today?
Thank you. I'm excited to be chatting with you today, and I am coming in from north central Alabama.
Nice. And for those of you who are keeping up on our travels, we are currently on the southwest portion of the Oregon coast, staying in a little place called Whalers Rest. It's really beautiful here. So I you can't see on the video, but it is really nice outside. So let me do a quick introduction for Joel so you guys know who he is. So Joel is a real life leader, and in a blended family world, you work hard. We work hard to raise kids properly and positively. And you basically love the privilege of sharing what you've learned with others. So what you do is you help blended families work together more constructively in order to positively address issues such as frustration, hurt, and resentment that comes from the past, parenting disagreements, scheduling problems for kids, sibling rivalries, and other issues related to blended family life. So what I want to start off with is tell me what your business is like now. What is it that you do for blended families? How do you do it? Are you a speaker, author, coach? What is it? How do you work with families? And describe a little bit what you mean by blended family and the help that you're providing.
Certainly, thank you. So the big part of my business right now is a lot of speaking. And then also I'm actually working on a book about blended family life right now, hoping to have that done within the next year. And in addition to that, I also do some blended family coaching. So blended families have a couple different definitions. The easiest way to think of it is as a step family or any other family that includes non-biological children. So whether it's adopting or fostering or things like that, because they all come with unique issues, depending on the ages of the children. If it's a divorce and remarriage, how old the kids were when the divorce happened, how old the kids are when a remarriage happens, the gender of the kids, are both spouses bringing in kids to this new marriage. Like, those are all factors that affect what a blended family looks like. And those also factor into how blended families relate to each other. And so my job is to help blended families figure out how to address their unique situations to make them better. So as you mentioned in the introduction, part of my job is to help families move from chaos to cooperation, or to make their communication go from terrible to bearable. That's one of the things that I really try to help people do, is because communication is a huge part of making any family work, but especially like in my situation, I'm divorced and remarried, which we'll get into, I'm sure. And I live about 1.5 miles from my ex-wife and her second husband. And we've got 2 kids together. And one of the biggest things we have to make sure we do is communicate well, because as complicated as life is with 2 kids, it's more complicated when you have 2 households and 4 parents trying to manage everybody's schedules. So just trying to help families figure out some of those things and how to make things work as smoothly as they can, so that long term the kids are able to come out of it as positively as they can. I mean, we've all seen statistics about the increased likelihood of children having, whether it's social anxiety or depression issues or problems in school or whatever, when they come from what it used to be called broken homes. I don't know if that term's PC anymore, but whenever there's a divorce type situation or single parent homes, those kids struggle more. So my goal is to help mitigate those factors so that kids can be as successful in the long run as they can be.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So, just so you know, I come from a blended family myself. My
Okay.
parents divorced when I was 13, and they both remarried. I have six stepbrothers, I think.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so a lot of them.
Yep.
Or no, not six, five. I think I have five. I can't count. There's a lot of them. But anyways, we were all in our mid to late teens when all of that happened. So I don't
Okay.
even I've got a more adult relationships with all of my siblings, if that makes sense, because
Hmm.
we met older.
Right.
Um, and so that's the way that goes down. But my wife and I are actually talking about adopting a kid out of foster care, so we might end up with a
Awesome.
blended family ourselves.
Absolutely. That's great. Yeah, I was actually
Yeah.
just talking with someone a few minutes ago. So here in Alabama, there's a group called Children's Aid Society for Alabama that I'll be doing a webinar for them in the spring and then speaking at their conference. And they work a lot with adoptive and foster families. Again, because adoptive and foster families, they face different issues than sort of step families, but some of them overlap pretty good, especially if you already have biological kids. If you then adopt someone,
Mm,
and so things like the gender of the kid that you adopt compared to what you already have, the age range, those kind of things, they can all factor in. My in-laws, my wife's older brother and his wife actually have two biological children, and they've adopted a special needs child from China, and in the process of adopting a second special needs child from China. Um, so that's a different type of blended family, and so some of the issues they have are similar to what we have in our step family, but not exactly the same. And so it's interesting to look at the dynamics and really try to learn from those situations what works in each family versus what needs to be adjusted, right? Because of the
yeah.
the uniqueness of each situation. So it's a lot of fun. It's very challenging, but it's also very rewarding to do this kind of work.
Yeah, and it's probably an interesting space to be in because you probably have principles that you back out to,
Yeah.
but every family is going to be a unique thing, and the way that they apply those principles and how they use them and how you teach them is going to be different for everyone. So
Yeah.
it's
Exactly right.
an, yeah, an endless number of ways that you can apply the same information.
Yes, that's exactly right. There are a couple key principles that I focus on, and then some specifics that go with each one. But how you apply those, that's something I can help you figure out. But it's not ever going to be applied exactly the same way in every family because it can't be. And even if it could
Yeah,
be, it'll change in 2 years because your kids will be different in 2 years, right? Because just
amen
when
to
I think,
that.
yeah, yeah,
I got
right,
four kids, and they are all completely different, and I don't
yeah,
understand it.
yeah, and we'll give it two
They're
years, and they'll all be different in a different way, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it's funny too because like you can see all the similarities between the kids. Like
Hmm.
you can tell they're all ours, and
That's
it's
right.
pretty easy. Like if you go out in public and be like, "Yeah, I can't deny these children," but they are just like that.
Yes. Yep.
They're vastly different.
Yeah, that's
Um,
exactly right. I actually, there's a group. So I'm a high school teacher in my day job, and there's a family there that has 5 kids in the school where I teach, 4 sons, and then the youngest one is a daughter. And I've taught all 4 sons, and I'll have the daughter in my spring semester. She played on my soccer team this fall. And it's really funny because I told her the other day, like, all 4 of your brothers are wonderful. They're all very distinctly your family, but they're all different from each other. Like
mm,
everybody, you see them and and you talk with them, oh yeah, they're in that family. But they're also very, very different, just like what you described. And it's fascinating how that works out.
yeah, yeah, it really is, and I think it's one of the for me at least, it's one of the joys of parenthood.
Hmm.
Just get to see and experience their very very different personalities and how they work out. But
Yeah,
yeah,
different
mine are.
skill sets, different talents, different hobbies, and getting to see all of those different things is a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah, and it just changes from the different time of life they're in. I don't have any teenagers
Hmm.
yet. I've got a half a year old, a 3 year old, a 6 year old, and 10 year old.
Oh
So
wow, okay,
all still young family at this point.
yeah, okay, yeah. See, mine are 15 and a half and just about to be 13. Um, so a lot of
You got
fun.
a house full of puberty. That's the
I,
that's the fun part. And
I do, and I work with high school kids all day. So apparently, like, I just never matured beyond about 16. So that's where I like to spend a lot of my time.
so bless you for working with all of the teenagers.
I would look, and this sounds really terrible, but I would take high schoolers over elementary school kids all day, every day. Like, I really feel like the
Yeah,
real superheroes are elementary school teachers because I find that I don't have the patience with young children that young children deserve.
Yeah, my wife's the other way around. She does all the homeschooling with the kids, and
Awesome.
she's fantastic with them as they're
Right.
young. And I'm with you. I think the high school kids, they're self motivated.
Right.
They can talk on your level, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And like
Yeah.
watching my wife do the things she does with the younger kids, and I'm like, oh man, I would like scoop my eyeballs out with a spoon
Yes.
before I did that.
Yes. See, my wife was homeschooled, and her mom did her homeschooling all the way through, like, first grade all the way through high school. And yeah, I thought the same thing. I thought that would absolutely, like, there's not enough money in the world to get me to teach elementary school kids. I,
Not
I
at all.
just I just could not do it. High school kids, they have their own issues, and they have their own challenges, but I'll take those challenges all day over dealing with, like, is that juice or is that snot? Like,
Yeah,
whatever that
yeah,
is on your
absolutely.
face right there, that's gross, and I don't want to help you clean that off. I don't want to do
or
that.
or they had lunch and you gave them one chocolate bar and they or one thing and they spread it all over the entire house,
Yes.
which is
Yes.
like, I don't know, they've got superpowers, right? We're just talking about
Yes.
superheroes. That's our children's superpowers, to spread whatever they have over a significantly larger portion of the land than you think it should be possible.
Yes, very good. That's exactly what it is. Way more than you think possible. That's exactly right.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm really excited. My son's getting into that 10-year-old age, and he's
Mm-hmm.
you know he's pretty advanced for his age, which is fun. And we're starting to get into talking about things like starting businesses and putting products together, and like
Okay.
he's at my game now.
Nice.
Stuff
Yeah.
that's interesting to talk about, and I don't have to do A B C D E F G, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. I've definitely enjoyed watching our kids grow up. All the different ages, obviously, they have their own kind of enjoyments for the parents, and their own challenges. But I definitely have found it, in a lot of ways, easier to relate to my kids as they've gotten older. And we can talk about things that are not just little kids stuff, because both of mine are daughters, and so we spent a significant chunk of their childhoods talking about things that sparkle and Disney princesses. And
Yeah,
we also
yeah.
talked some sports. I taught them, I taught them about the importance of Duke basketball, and I taught them about the importance of just the game of soccer in general. Like, it is the greatest game in the world, and so I taught them the important stuff. But it's more fun when you can talk about it, like you mentioned, more on your level instead of two
Yeah, I
tiny
have
kids.
my three youngest ones are all daughters. So
Okay.
my current and my future is filled with princesses
Yep.
and
You know.
sparkly things.
Yep.
And
Yep.
my
Glitter
3-year-old for
everything.
Halloween, was a rainbow unicorn kitty superhero, which was fantastic.
That is
Um,
great. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I could not even fathom the amount of princess dresses and accessories that we once owned. It's just an absurd amount. So, yeah,
That's awesome.
you have a lot of years of that left, and I do hope you enjoy it, because there are parts of it that really are a lot of fun. They
Oh yeah,
really are.
they're a blast. They're crazy, and they're so full of like life and vitality and energy, and like I can't even like, I don't understand them at all. Like my son, I totally get my son, and like
Right.
he's like outside like beating on a tree, and my wife's like, "What's he doing?" And I'm like, "He's beating on a tree, duh." And
That's
she's
right.
like, "I don't
What?
get it." And I'm like, my daughters are over here like crying over something, and I'm like, why are they crying over?
Yes, yeah, that's exactly. And the thing is, like, so I've been coaching girls sports for years. I coach girls high school soccer, girls travel soccer. I feel, the much that what you described about my daughters, where I thought, because I'd coached girls sports for years, that I would have a head start on understanding my kids when they became teenagers, and it turns out I just don't. I don't fathom women any better now than I did when I was a teenager. I don't understand girls anymore, even though I have two of them and I've coached them for years. They just don't make any sense to me. So
Yep, yep. And I was under the impression that getting married and having three daughters would improve that situation. It does not. So if
nope,
you are getting into that game, don't get your hopes up.
that's
Um,
exactly right. You can learn to, hopefully, be less boneheaded, or maybe accidentally offend them less often. But in terms of
mhm.
actually understanding them, yeah, no.
Well,
And if you
my
do, like, you're
go-to
sitting on a gold mine.
my go-to is just whenever they're crying, just pick them up, put them on my lap, and just pat them on the back and let them cry. And
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and that's a great place to start. That's exactly right. Show them some love, show them some empathy. That's a great place to begin.
absolutely. So What I want to talk about is your origin story, right?
Mm-hmm.
So every hero we talk on the show has an origin story. It's where you started to realize that you were different, that maybe you had superpowers and maybe you could use them to help other people, right? So how did that happen for you? How did you go from being a happy high school teacher to someone who's like, you know what, I have a blended family and I can help other people in this area? How did that happen?
So a lot of it goes back to actually my childhood. My parents split up when I was in middle school. And I remember when they told us about it, it was over, I believe it was over Christmas break during my 8th grade year. And I remember in that moment sitting in my parents' den, which is now going to be mom's den because dad was going to move out. I remember thinking I just became a statistic. And I'm not really sure what that's going to look like moving forward. Fortunately, my parents were wonderful. They had a better divorce than a lot of marriages I've seen. They were entirely respectful of each other. There wasn't any arguing. There wasn't any fighting and yelling. We lived with mom, but dad came and picked us up every day for school, so we got to see him all the time. We actually still celebrated Christmas and Thanksgiving together. We would still do Thanksgiving at mom's house. Even about a year later when mom started dating my stepdad, we would have mom, dad, stepdad, and then all the kids around the table together at Thanksgiving. And I didn't know that that was unusual until I graduated high school and started talking with other people whose parents had divorced and realized just how blessed that I'd been. Well, my goal was, so I got married for the first time when I was 19. I was just finished my sophomore year of college. And my plan for life was to get married and have kids and never divorce and to have a wonderful marriage and a great family. And 8.5 years later, I was going through my own divorce with 2 kids. And what I fell back on was looking at the example that my parents had set, which was to do the right thing even when it's hard. And again, looking at it from the standpoint of a father, like I looked at what my dad did and I just tried to imitate that. I tried to do what dad did, and I tried to ask myself, because my dad had passed away by the time I divorced, my question was, okay, if dad were in this situation, how would he handle it? And that was kind of my go-to for everything that I tried to do going through the divorce. And since then, I remarried about 5.5 years ago. My ex-wife remarried about 6 months before I did. And again, throughout that whole process, it was a question of what would dad have done? How would dad have handled this? And then also asking the question, okay, what would mom have done? How would she have handled this? Because she's still alive, but I also got a lot of wisdom from her. And then in the last 5 years, I've looked around and just seen, one, that there are more and more blended families every day. And two, unfortunately, the failure rate for those blended families is even higher than the regular divorce rate. And the people who are most negatively impacted by that are children. And so my question was, how can I help other families do things the way that my parents had done? Because I wouldn't say that I turned out perfect, but I would also say that my parents did everything they could to mitigate the negative effects of coming from a divorced home. And so the question is, how could I help other people also do that? How could I help other people get past their hurt so that they can relate to their ex more like a coworker? Right? Because I've heard that analogy before. Like, the thing is, when you're in a co-parenting situation, you may still have a lot of hurt and resentment toward your ex. But if you are always acting from a place of hurt and resentment, the people that you're really damaging are your kids together. That's who you're really hurting. So maybe one way to reframe the way that you think about your co-parenting is not, God, I still have to raise a kid with that parent, that kid, or, that adult that I really hate. What you need to think of is, okay, that's a coworker. We have a common task. Our common task is raising these children together. And even if it's a coworker that you find maybe unpleasant in some way, you still have to find a way to coexist with them peacefully and productively. And I found that analogy to be helpful both to myself, not because I don't get along with my ex-wife. We actually get along pretty well now, but especially in looking at the way that my parents did things. And also I found it to be helpful in other families where when they reframe how they think about it, that helps them to understand their roles differently. It helps them to be able to look at their children not as pawns to be used in a tug of war, but as beings to be cherished and to be cultivated well together. And so I found that to be a very helpful analogy.
Absolutely, yeah. And I had a similar experience to yours growing up. When my parents divorced, I think I was like between my 8th and 9th grade year, so right into high school. And same kind of thing. And I remember sitting in a little pink chair and my parents telling me and thinking, oh man, we just became statistics.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Like the same thought.
Yeah.
But I was about the same age, and that was the thought that came through my head. And I really lucked out in the parent department. My parents are incredible. They still are.
Mm-hmm.
and they handled the divorce very, very well. And growing up, we did the whole, 1 week at each parent's
Okay.
house all through growing
Right.
up. So 1 week here, 1 week there, and I didn't like it. And my parents didn't like it. Nobody liked it.
Right.
But it was, but they did their best, and it was really, they were fantastic with each other. And I even recall, I remember being, upset at my mom as a teenager, which is a normal, teenage thing,
Right.
and venting to my dad about it. And my dad, saying something that was disrespectful to my mother, and my dad clocking me upside the head and being like, I don't care if she's not here, you respect your mom.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And good on them
It's
for
like,
doing
what-
that.
Yeah, and it's like, it doesn't matter what, she did to me or whatever you think is going on. It's like, that's not your relationship.
That's right.
That's
You
my
will be
relationship with her.
respectful to your mother.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's my relationship with her, not yours.
Right.
And which was a good lesson for me.
Right. Yeah. And
as
that's
it
probably one that
growing up.
wouldn't have made sense to a teenager necessarily.
Mhm.
But yeah, looking
Yeah.
back, you're exactly right. That's a very powerful lesson for your dad to have shared.
Yeah. So it went really well, and I still have, we do the same thing. Like just this year, we're going down to, we're gonna go spend Thanksgiving with my dad, and then Christmas with my mom, with our kids. But yeah, so I think
Good.
they did a great job with it. And when I brought my wife out to introduce them to my family, she came from a home that was not divorced and having any of those problems, and she met my family on both sides. And on the plane flight back home, right before we got married, she tells me, she's like, your family's fantastic. Like, how, like, I can't believe how like well put together they are. They're like,
Good.
they're better put together than my family is.
Yeah, well, praise the Lord for that, because again, that's not usual, and it's very encouraging. I'm really glad to hear that story, because that's not what I normally hear. Normally, I hear people who talk about how ugly their parents' divorce was, or how their parents just badmouthed each other, or used the kids as pawns in order to try to get back at their ex for whatever it may have been. And again, I really, those stories break my heart, because the people who are suffering the most are the kids. And I understand it, because there's a guy that I know named John Finch. He works, he's in charge of something called the Encouraging Dads Project, which I encourage a lot of people to check out if you haven't. But he's got a great quote that he uses where he says, hurt people hurt people. Hurting people hurt other people.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of people in a blended family are still hurting. And as a result of that, they, whether on purpose or not, they hurt others. And a lot of times it's the kids who are most hurt by that. And that's something that, again, that I really want to try to mitigate and try to help people overcome. So again, I'm very encouraged to hear your story. That's a very positive thing I don't get to actually run across a lot. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
I tell people all the time, I hit the parenting jackpot. My parents are wonderful. They encouraged me all the way through my life, and even they're both employees and come from the employee mindset. And while they did struggle with my desire to be an entrepreneur, and still regularly, like, I don't, early on they were like, I don't understand why you want to do this or why you're making decisions you're making, and I don't think it's right. 10, 15 years later, after seeing all the stuff I've done, they're still like, I don't have a clue what you do, but I'm proud of you.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Yep. And that's a world that I'm still learning. I've been in for a couple years now as an entrepreneur, and it's different than anything I ever envisioned for myself. I was completely happy being an employee. I was totally okay getting a paycheck and teaching my classes, and I still love doing those things. But the more and more I've learned about the world of entrepreneurship, the more attractive I find it. It's still terrifying, and I still feel very much like a novice in some ways, or a dilettante, but I very much am enjoying what I'm learning. And I think I'm probably farther along than I give myself credit for. But it's really a lot of fun to be learning to think a very different way than I ever had.
Yeah, I think from a parenting perspective, the problem that my family ran into with me is that as an employee, you have a different risk profile than an entrepreneur does.
Absolutely.
And so I'm willing to take a lot greater risks than my parents are comfortable taking themselves, or are comfortable with me taking for my family.
That's right.
And so I could see the struggle with raising someone who was a born entrepreneur. Like, I started my first business at 13, right?
Wow. Okay.
I conned my dad into giving me a loan for money so I could go and buy candy wholesale at the big box store and sell it to all my friends retail at school, right?
Nice.
Right. So they started young with me with dealing with like, what are you doing?
Right.
Right. And anyways, it was, I think they did a fairly good job handling someone like me, despite having a blended family and all those things.
Right.
And not ever, what would you say, like discouraging?
Yeah, just
Or,
squashing a kid's dreams. Like
yeah.
if this is what you want to do, like awesome, do that. Even though we have no idea how you're going to, and we're not necessarily a big fan, but if that's what you're feeling called to do, then good luck to you. And
they definitely were on the train of like, here's my reservations, and here's why I think you're going to go wrong, and you'll feel free to prove me wrong. But,
right. Yep. Yep. Yeah, and that's good.
Yeah,
And as you know, as a parent, sometimes that's what we have to say is based on everything I know and based on my worldview. Here's what I see happening. But I would love to be wrong. I'd love for you to prove me incorrect, and you do great things. Because I say that to my high school students sometimes. You know, certain kids have bad habits. They're not fulfilling their potential. And I've told some of them, listen, if you keep doing this, here's where you're going to end up failing this class. Then you're going to have to be here at summer school. And then, you know, I said, I know I'd love for you to prove me wrong. But based on what I've seen in my classroom so far, here's what the next 6 months of your life looks like. You know, and some of them they'll follow that. And then other times they'll completely prove me wrong. You know, and that's great because when you see the potential for someone to do great things, but you see their habits are taking them somewhere else, it's wonderful for them to prove the habits that you saw originally. It's wonderful to see them prove that wrong and instead see them succeed where that's not what the early signs would have pointed toward. You know what I mean? Like that's a really encouraging thing. Yeah.
And you know, when it comes to the whole entrepreneurship game, and I'm sure you're figuring out, you know, you trade in some of that risk profile for a healthy dose of freedom that is not not available on the employee side, which is the reason I was doing it. So
right. Yeah. You know, I think I live, this is very nice. I have sort of one foot in both worlds because I'm a high school teacher, but I have a very understanding administrator. My first few years teaching at this school, like I just never took days off. And so I built up a decent amount of personal days and sick days and those kinds of things. And so when I have speaking opportunities, I don't ever get any negative feedback about taking a day off to go and speak. So I was gone last Thursday to go speak at a leadership event a couple hours from my house and in Huntsville at the Space and Rocket Center. There's this big youth conference there with 80 kids from all over the Southeast. And my administrator was like, yes, go have a great time. I know you spoke there last year and you said it was awesome. So go and have a great time and do a good job.
How do your students handle you hopping out to go speak and be entrepreneurial? You get a lot of questions and stuff about that?
I do get some. Yeah, I get, it's really interesting. Just in the past year or two, I've gotten a lot of kids who will actually listen to things like this. They'll start listening to the podcast interview because I'll go into school tomorrow morning and I'll say something in one of my classes about, yeah, I had a podcast interview yesterday. It'll probably come out, you know, whenever it comes out. And, oh yeah, I listened to one you did with this guy a while back. And so I have to be careful what stories I tell from my classroom. Because I don't want kids to hear a story and go, hey, he was talking about me, you know. But no, it is. I do. I get some questions about it. I get some people that ask me why I like it or what my goals are or, you know, just what about it appeals to me. Because I'm one of those people that loves being on stage. I love to be able to help people. And that's part of why I became a teacher is I like to make an impact on people's lives. Well, I can do the same thing as an entrepreneur, whether it's from the stage or in a workshop or in, you know, individual coaching or whatever it may be. Like the desire to help people is still there. That's kind of the core of what I do is I just want to help people. And so there are a lot of different avenues for being able to do that. And I feel very blessed to get to do things that I love. And as a bonus, people pay me for that. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that is incredibly awesome. And, you know, one of the things we say in the entrepreneur community frequently is that teaching sells, meaning that that it's one of the best skills you can have is to know how to teach other people. So coming from the teaching world is probably a really useful skill set.
It is. It's a lot of fun. It's, you know, it's also great. I shared this, again, I was speaking to high school kids last week and I told them, I said, they were a great audience. They were participating, they were paying attention, they were engaged, they were answering questions. And because I don't stand up and just lecture for 45 minutes in the classroom. I definitely don't do that from the stage. I like to have a lot of audience interaction and participation both in the classroom and at speaking things. And this group, they were wonderful. Like I said, they were laughing at the jokes, they were answering the questions, they were participating in the different parts of it. And I told them, I said, I love coming to groups like this because you chose to be here. And they kind of looked at me. I said, here's the thing. There is no tougher audience in the world than a group of jaded 15-year-olds at 8 o'clock on a rainy Monday morning. Like that is the hardest audience in the world to get interested in what I'm talking about, which at the time is U.S. history. You know what I mean? So I feel like if I can get a group of tired, feeling like they're overburdened 15-year-olds interested in the Monroe Doctrine at 8:15 on a Monday, that if you put me in front of an audience that wants to be there already, man, that's already 90% done. Like they chose to come there. Like this is easy right here. Like this is great. So.
Man, for whatever reason, that brings me right back to high school. I was the weird kid that it was like, you mean I can start? They had early start classes. I could start class at 6:30 and be done at 10. I was like, I was all over that.
Yeah.
And so I was at school at 6:30 in the morning every day,
nice.
Done at 10 o'clock, and was able to get into business stuff and started got a job and a car, and I was working full time by 11th grade,
nice.
and top of keeping my grades up and starting things over. I was crazy.
Yeah, but I think that's great because again, it shows what's possible if you're willing to do things differently, which I think is a key part of being an entrepreneur is just thinking differently than most people do. I know, I'm sure a lot of people that listen to your show are familiar with the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, but that's one of the big things he talks about is just you have to get over the employee mindset like you and I were talking about earlier. You have to be willing to think in a different way about risk and about getting a paycheck versus creating an income. And what you just mentioned, that's a great example of thinking differently and getting different results. Because I'm sure a lot of kids your age were just going to class like normal, and maybe they'd work an after school job, and maybe they made a little bit of money. And if they, if their parents were nice and bought them a car, or if they saved up enough money over the course of a few summers, they bought a car or whatever it may have been. But that's kind of the normal way of doing things. And it works out okay for a lot of people. But if you really want to make a difference, if you really want to do something bold, you've got to think boldly. You've got to think differently. And that's something, again, I'm learning as an entrepreneur now, just like you mentioned, like I've got to be willing to take risks that I probably wouldn't have been willing to take 5 years ago. And being willing to do that is entertaining. It's scary, but it's entertaining.
One of the things about that is one of the risks, just to bring up the whole point is like we had the opportunity to take early classes, so I did.
Mm-hmm.
Right, it's a risk socially, right? There's social risks.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the biggest things that comes, from a teenager or even as making that transition from an employee to an entrepreneur is the social risks.
Yeah,
my parents
absolutely.
don't approve. My friends don't approve. My family thinks I'm strange, right?
Right.
That's the social risks that come with being an entrepreneur because it's not a huge section of our population.
Right.
They're a big thing to deal with. And to your point, the reason I got into that whole thing is actually because of the Robert Kiyosaki book. When I was about 9.5, 10 years old, my dad's friend had given him a copy of the book, and I don't even know if he read it, but he was like, "This looks like the kind of thing my son would like," so he gave it to me.
Nice.
I read it
that's
awesome.
9.5
years old, and I was addicted, and I convinced my parents, because I was a well-behaved kid, to instead of dropping me off at after-school to drop me off at Barnes and Noble instead.
Nice.
You could pick me up after work, and I used to spend my afternoons all the way through, later elementary and middle school at Barnes and Noble, reading all the books I couldn't afford to buy.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a great place to do it. It's a great place to do it.
I'd pile them all up and sit in their little chairs and read books until mom came and got me from after school.
Yeah. And again, but what you're describing is worlds different than what most kids are willing to do. And therefore your results now are worlds different than what a lot of people end up with. And again, I think that's great. I think that's really, I think that's very powerful. And that's what I try to do with blended families, because the usual part of blended families, when you look at people who are divorced and remarried, most people who go through divorce have no problem being angry at their ex. They have no problem acting out of hurt, and they have no problem bad mouthing their ex. And the problem with that is, like, of course that's usual. That's because it's easy. So what I want
Yeah.
to challenge people to do is be willing to think differently about what your divorce has to look like. Be willing to think differently about what your blended family could look like. Like if you're angry all the time because your blended family is just hard and it hurts and because you and your ex can't get along, then you need to do something different. I mean, everybody knows Einstein's definition of insanity, right? You do the same thing over and over and you expect different results. Well, yeah, no, that is insanity. So if you want
Yeah.
different results, you have to take different actions, and that starts with thinking differently. So one of the big things I try to get people to do is to understand that when you start changing the way you think about the possibilities, now you can actually see how things could go differently moving forward, right? So if you want to have a better blended family, you have to be willing to, at least temporarily, you have to be willing to think differently about your ex. And what I mean by that is you have to be willing to give them the benefit of the doubt sometimes. Even if you know they're probably going to take advantage of you at some point, you've got to be
Mhm.
willing to just allow that to pass, again, at least temporarily. You've got to be willing to, whether you use this, the phrase, get the short end of the stick or whatever it may be, like you have to be willing to just suck it up sometimes so that you can start rebuilding a foundation from which to move forward.
Yeah.
The
And
Go ahead.
to draw a parallel to that in the entrepreneurial world, one of the things that I regularly tell my clients and students and stuff is that sometimes you just have to be willing to eat dirt,
Yeah.
right? Like you, when you're getting your business started or you're running things off the ground, you have to build the skill set. You have to do the thing,
Yeah.
right? And it's, you don't start off immediately with $1 trillion valuation with a billion devices all over the world, right? Like
Right.
it took Apple 40 years to get there,
Yep.
and almost going under in the 90s and stuff like
Yep.
that. Like to build a business, sometimes you just have to eat dirt. To build a good, strong, solid family, sometimes you
Yeah.
just have to do the hard thing.
You do. That's exactly right. You got to be willing to put up with some of the crap of it, and you're exactly right. That's a huge part of it. But the goal is to keep looking forward, keep moving forward, and keep believing that it can get better. Because if you're just convinced your blended family is always going to be painful, if you're convinced your ex is always going to be a jerk, and so you treat them badly, yeah, they're probably always going to be a jerk back to you. I'm not saying it's your fault, but you're also not helping. Right.
Yeah.
And so I actually gave my blended family presentation at a local Kiwanis club about a month and a half ago. And I tell people, I said, there's some hard truths when I share with blended families. And I tell them, listen, you're going to have to do things that you don't want to. You're going to have to do things that make you uncomfortable. You're going to have to do things that are probably going to make you angry. And you're going to have to do things not acting out of that anger. And I got done with my presentation. A lady in the crowd raised her hand. She said, yeah, I just got one question. I said, sure, what's up? And she said, how do you not get punched in the face when you when you tell people stuff like that? And I said, well, the thing is, and it's a fair question. I said, you've got to be willing to start with empathy, because she's exactly right. If I go talk with someone who's in a blended family situation that's hard and hurting, and I say to them, well, listen, you're just doing it wrong. Here's what you need to do. They probably are going to hit me in the face, and I would deserve that, because what a jerk thing to do. Who am I to come in and tell you you're running your life wrong? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's totally fair. Instead, what I want to do is start with empathy. I want to come alongside you and say, listen, I understand that you're hurting. I understand that your ex wronged you, or that you wronged your ex, or both. I understand that it's not how you want it to be. That's totally fair for you to feel that way. I understand, because I've been there. What I'm asking you to do is consider what would you like it to look like? And then ask the question, okay, how do we get there? Because when you reframe it, it helps people look at it differently, and then maybe they're willing to do at least a little bit of the work. The analogy that I use, and this is again as a history nerd, is it's from medieval architecture. It's called a cofferdam. And so a cofferdam is what you would use to build the stone columns for a bridge across a moving river, right? And so the way that you would do that is you would cut down a bunch of planks, and you would go out into the middle of the river in a boat, and you would drive these planks into the riverbed, all the way down into the riverbed in a kind of a circle shape, right? And then you do the same thing in a slightly bigger circle outside the first one, okay? And so then what you do is you bucket the water out, and you fill in the cracks with some kind of mortar or whatever, so that you have a watertight seal. So now you've got kind of an inverted cone over the surface of the water, and it's empty. And so now you can start putting in rocks and things like that on solid ground on the riverbed. But it takes a long time to cut down the trees and to build the cofferdam and to bucket the water out. But until you do that, you're not ever going to be able to build a solid foundation for your bridge. Once you do that, then you can build a good stone column. You can use you can build that bridge across it. But until you put in the hard work at the beginning, doing stuff that's uncomfortable and painful, until you do that, you're not ever going to be able to move forward. You're just going to keep dropping rocks on the bottom of the river. It's not actually doing you any good, right?
That's a good metaphor for that too. Yeah,
thanks. I came across it in a giant fat historical novel that I read one time, and I thought was just really fascinating. So, but I love that, because again, I always wondered, how do you build bridges across these big old rivers? Like, how do you do that? And the answer is you don't. You build it on dry ground. So you create the dry ground in the middle of a river, right? And that's how you start building. I thought, well, that is pretty cool. That is pretty cool. And that's what I want to help blended families do is, okay, so how do we start driving these big old, tree trunks down into the riverbed? And once we have that done, how do we start bailing the water out? And then we can start piling the rocks on so that we got a firm foundation to start building our bridge. It's going to take time. It's going to take effort, but it can be done.
One of the things that I teach, and I do a lot with how to give persuasive presentations.
Okay.
And so I teach my clients how to do that, right? So we use sales presentations like webinars or master classes or other things, or stage talks where you get on the stage and then at the end you would sell something.
Awesome.
And one of the primary problems that a lot of speakers run into is like, I have like the thing is people are doing things wrong, and if they changed the way they were doing them, then they would get better results. But how do you present that in a way that someone doesn't, they don't get punched in the face?
That's exactly right, which is a fair question.
Yeah, which is a fair question, because you can't just get up on stage and be like, okay, listen, I know you want to get into the space of, whatever it is. Here's the thing, you're doing it wrong. You immediately put everyone into defense mode, right? So the way that we approach it is I have a little a process we run through, but it's basically it's identifying the existing system that people are doing, and this may or may not be useful for your training stuff, but we identify the existing system. Right, so the existing system of like, how do most people approach a blended family? They do these things. They're terrible to each other, blah, blah, blah. And what you're looking to get going in the audience's head is that chain of yeses. Right? Yep, I get that. Yes, I've seen that. Yes, I get it. Yep. Right. And so they're sitting there going, yep, I see that. Like, I see that in my own life. I see how that happens in other people's lives. Whatever, you're just explaining, here's how most people do it. And then we start getting into identifying the failure points of that system. Like, where is this breaking down for people, right? Where it's not working now, it's not working because of technology or whatever. What are the failure points for whatever the existing system is? And then we want to ask a provocative question. Right. The provocative question is why is it not working? And what if we changed something?
Right. What if we did it this way instead?
Yeah. What if we changed something? And my favorite example for that is, what if we had a school for witchcraft and wizardry? Then you'd make the first $1 billion author.
Nice.
Right.
Nice.
Right? What if is a powerful question.
Yes.
And so what if we changed something? And then what I tell my students, my clients to do is to get up and say, essentially, almost exactly this. I have a theory about how we can fix the broken system. Why don't you check it out with me and see if you agree? Right?
Nice.
And
okay.
You're inviting them to experience something different instead of telling them they're wrong and they should do it differently.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. It's interesting because I do something similar in a very different context. Again, I mentioned I'm a soccer coach, and it's funny because after a game that I coached a couple weeks ago, I had a referee come up to me after the game, and he said, "Listen, I was talking with the other referee crew, the other guys on the referee crew, and we were just amazed at the way that you coach your team." And I said, "Oh, thank you. I think what do you mean?" And he said, well, whenever they do something they're not supposed to, when they do something incorrectly, you don't yell at them, why did you do that? Or do it this way. You said, okay, that was pretty good, but what if you did this next time instead? Right. And it's the same kind of thing where you saw the breakdown, because on a soccer field, it's easy to see where the breakdown was, right? You dribble when you should have passed, or you made the wrong pass, or you made the pass at the wrong angle, or whatever it is. But instead of saying, no, do it this way, you say to them, okay, I see what you were trying to do. But instead, next time, let's try to do it this way, and then let's test that and see if that does a little bit better. Because it's a much more positive. Yeah, it's a positive persuasion technique. But it also, it's very results oriented. I saw what you were trying to do, but we all know that you didn't get what you wanted out of that. That's not what you were going for. So instead, let's try to just change it a little bit and see if we get better results doing it this other way. And I think you're right. I think that's a very powerful way of getting people to, instead of, like you said, instead of just calling them out and going, that was dumb, why would you do it that way? Which doesn't go well, but I will admit I do that with my freshmen sometimes because high school freshmen deserve it. But, you know, right? But no, in general, it's much more powerful to say to someone, I see what you were trying to do, or I understand why you did what you did. But what if we try doing it this other way? Let's try that and see if it works out better. Because again, you're inviting them to, like you mentioned, come along with you and see if it works differently, instead of just calling them out and saying, don't do it that way, that's entirely wrong, and immediately getting people defensive and not wanting to listen and getting immediate pushback because they want to prove you wrong. You've called them wrong, so they want to prove that you're wrong. And so then they resist even more.
Walls up. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm not sure why, but your comment about freshmen just reminded me of a thing my wife told me the other day. That once you know you've gotten old, when you start agreeing with all the parents in Disney movies.
Dude. Yep. Yeah, look, I'm telling you, story of my life.
You're like, it's like, Daddy, I'm an adult. You're like, shut up, you're 16.
That's exactly right. You don't know what you're talking about. You can barely drive.
Yeah. It's like, shut up. You're doing it wrong. Anyways, you're like, yep, I've officially made it. I'm old.
That's right. That's hilarious.
All the Disney movies.
Yes. Well, it's funny. When my girls were little, I hated The Little Mermaid. Hated that movie. And they, you know, my daughters would be like, but Dad, it's so good. I'm like, no, it's not. It's a movie about a girl ignoring her father, disobeying everything he's ever said. And oh, look, it turns out fine in the end because it was for a boy. Are you kidding me? That's the message we want to teach our daughters? Absolutely not. So at one point we moved houses and I accidentally on purpose lost our copy of Little Mermaid and never bought another one.
Oh, darn.
Yeah, I know. Oh. You know, and it sounds kind of goofy, but it's exactly right. Your wife's right. Like that, it's one of those moments where I knew I was getting old, where it's like I cannot even tolerate that movie because the message behind it is so against everything that I have to say as a parent.
Yeah, I get it. We just let them listen to the soundtrack. The soundtrack's
there
great.
You go. Well, and that's the thing is my wife loves Disney movies. She sings like a Disney princess, and she loves to sing some of those movies. So, and now that my girls are older, it's funny because they will watch those movies and I don't know if this is good or bad, but they can watch the movies and see it from my perspective. Oh yeah, Dad. Okay. I understand why that Ariel, that was a stupid decision. I'm not sure what you were thinking right there. Like giving up your greatest talent for some boy that doesn't really know you exist. Probably not what we want to do as teenage girls.
Probably
okay,
not.
Good. I'm glad you can see that, sweetheart. Thank you.
So, I think we may have almost covered this a little bit if people were paying attention, and I think it probably stands out. But what would you say your superpower is that you bring to the table when it comes to working with blended families?
I bring the wisdom of a lot of mistakes. I actually tell my students my superpower, not in business, but my superpower in general, is the ability to unintentionally anger women of all ages.
Wow, that's a good one.
It's really good. Before my wife and I got married, we were standing outside our house one day, and as we were dating, and my ex-wife was coming to pick up the kids because it was switchover time. And as she came to pick up the kids, we're just talking a little bit, and the conversation went in such a way that for about 10 minutes, I'm standing outside my ex-wife's car in front of my girlfriend, reminiscing with my ex-wife about movies we used to watch to fall asleep together in bed.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And so then she left, and I turned around and looked at my girlfriend, who is now my wife, and she did not look happy. And I didn't understand why. And she went stomping up the front steps of my house, and I thought, that's not like her. She's normally not stompy. And as she's walking in the house, I said, did I do something wrong? And she turns around and she goes, oh, you think? And I'm like, I do. Yes, I think I did something wrong. And we came inside. I said,
I'm going to need your help.
That's it. I said, okay, so I'm trying to understand this. I think you're upset, but I don't know why. Could you explain this to me, please? And she just looked at me. I mean, her jaw dropped, not in a good way. And she looked at me, she went, there's no way you are that dumb. And I said, oh no, I am. And I told you this before we started dating, because the same thing had happened not that same, but like when I was married the first time, I told my first wife, I said, look, I'm pretty intelligent, but when it comes to anything female, like I'm an idiot. I need you to talk, treat me like I've got a third grader's kind of brain power when you're talking about what I've done boneheaded. And so I told that story to my girlfriend after my divorce. I'm telling her this. And I said, so here's what just happened. Like, I don't understand why you're angry, but I'd love to know so I don't do that again. And she went, wow, you really don't get it. No, ma'am, I do not. And she explained to me why it might be hurtful for me to reminisce with someone in front of the person that I'm currently involved with. And when she explained it, I thought, oh, yeah. Oh, wow. I'm really sorry. I get that now. Right. But I didn't get it before then. And it's really just because I don't know if it's because I'm really that dense or lacked empathy or that self-centered, whatever it was. When she explained it to me, I got it. And so for me, like when I work with blended families, sometimes I have to really ask them a lot of questions to help them understand, okay, here's what you're doing and here's what you think about it. But look at it from someone else's perspective and see how it's affecting them, whether that's looking at it from your kid's perspective or looking at it from the perspective of your ex and their new partner. How is this coming across to them? And again, if I approach it wrong, I may get punched in the face. But if I approach it correctly, sometimes it really opens their eyes and they say, oh, I get that now, right? So my superpower there is, again, it's the wisdom of a lot of mistakes. It's the experience of being in a blended family, both as a kid and as an adult, and the ability to empathize with people because I've had to learn how to from accidentally hurting people. I spent years accidentally being extra harsh with my daughters. I didn't realize that raising girls was different than raising boys. I'd never raised a boy. I've never raised a boy even now. I've taught them. I've coached them. And I try to treat my daughters like the boys that I've taught and coached. And you cannot do that. And I didn't know that for years. I didn't know my daughters. So my ex-wife would use the expression. She would say, they have tissue paper hearts. They're that gentle. They're that fragile. And I never understood that. Until it was almost too late. So like even now, my older daughter and I, we struggle. She's actually spending a lot more time living with her mom right now because of a lot of hurt that I caused her growing up, because I was really, I was harsh with her and I didn't realize I was being harsh, or I didn't mean to be that kind of harsh. But now I'm seeing the results of it. And so I've tried to treat my younger daughter differently. And that's good because my younger daughter and I, we get along great. But my older daughter and I are struggling. And part of the reason is because of how harsh I was with her. Well, I should have known better because I saw that happen with my dad and my older brother. My dad was retired military and he was raising my older brother like a raw recruit. And my older brother was not a raw recruit. He was a little kid. And that caused a lot of friction. My brother and my dad didn't get along until my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And they finally were able to reconcile before dad passed away. For about a year and a half, they got along really well. But they had already spent 30 years not getting along. And that was really, I should have learned more from that than I did. And so now, again, I can look at what happened with them. I can look at what I'm struggling with my daughter, and I can go to other people and I can say, hey, listen, I can tell you where you don't want to be because I've been there. I can tell you what you don't want to do because I've done that. And so let me help you figure out how to not struggle in this way. So that's kind of that's a lot of what I bring to the table in terms of blended families.
Yeah, and it's definitely it's an interesting thing because you have a lot of differences, like the differences between, like, just as a gentleman, how you think versus how a woman thinks.
Yep.
And when you're raising kids, you have the way that they think, the way that they feel, and the way they perceive the world is both different depending on their gender and their age, and and some of that stuff you just don't get until you've been through it. Right?
Yeah, and for me, it wasn't until I'd screwed up a couple times, honestly.
Yeah, and one of the things that, like, my wife and I talk about this all the time, that as men, we tend to have, like, we have the box that we're in. We like our brain. You pull out the box, and I'm in this box right now. Reminiscing with my ex-wife, and like everything else is not in the box.
Right.
So it's not like connected, but like
right. And I can't see how. That's right. I can't see how what I'm doing in my box is bothering you right over there.
Until someone, like, comes over and puts that bother in your box, and you're like, oh, now I get it.
And yes, that's a great way to describe. I love that expression. Puts the bother in your box. I may steal that actually. That's really good.
Yeah. Someone puts the bother in your box for you, and you're like, oh, now that it's in the box, you're like, now I see it.
Yeah, I don't like that at all. Why would you put that there?
Why would you put that in the box?
That's right.
But yeah, it's the way that we don't always make those connections unless we've
Right.
already made those connections. Right. And so you have two different ways you can learn those things. One is you can learn them from your own experience, or you can learn them from someone else's experience.
Right.
And
yeah.
right, I tell my kids all the time, the best teacher is experience, and the best experience is someone else's.
Yes,
so, like,
that's good too.
Yeah, if you watch your older brother burn his hand on the pot, like, learn from him that it's hot instead of having to touch it yourself.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, I used a very similar example in my my book I wrote a couple years ago. There's a quote from J.R.R. Tolkien in Lord of the Rings where he says, "The burned hand teaches best. Advice about fire goes to the heart." But it doesn't have to be your hand, which is exactly what you said. And I think that's exactly right. Like, you can learn from other people's experience, and if you do, you might save yourself a whole lot of trouble. And that's one of the things that I try to share with people.
One of the things that has driven me nuts as a parent, and I'm sure it has for you as well, is sometimes, despite giving your children that message over and over again, they still have to touch the pot themselves.
Yes.
And as a parent, sometimes you just have to let them touch the pot. Right?
Yeah, and I've found as a parent that's something I severely struggle with, is letting kids just touch the pot. My father-in-law actually described it as letting them walk off the pier. Because he said, you can hold your kid's hand and you can walk them out on the pier and you can tell them stay away from the edge. But at some point, if they want to jump off the edge, like, you got to let go and let them walk off the pier, because that's what they're going to do. They're either going to do it with you there watching, where you can help them then get back out, or they're going to wait until they're not where you're watching and then they're going to do it. But at some point, if they want to walk off the pier badly enough, they're going to. And that's something that's been really hard for me to accept as a parent.
That's one of the principles we've tied into our parenting, for, like, just as an example, when you have toddlers who are interested in things like, the sharp knives in the knife block.
Yep.
Right. Your typical response to that is, you can't touch the knives.
That's right.
You're not allowed to touch the knives.
Yeah.
Put things on the knives, hide the knives, make everything in your life more difficult. Right.
Yeah.
And then the moment that your eyes are turned or something's not going the way that you want, they're going to find a way to, stack things up and climb on there and get sharp knives and then hurt themselves.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's the way that goes. You just made it more curiosity for them. And what my wife and I decided to do, and we do this all the time in lots of different situations, and it's surprising how often it works, like most of the time, is we show them the appropriate context for those tools, for the things that they want to play with. So, like, my son at 3 years old is like, I want to play with the knives. And I was like, you can't play with the knives now, but here, how about this? Tonight when we cook dinner, you can help mommy cut the vegetables.
Nice.
Right?
Takes away the curiosity.
So now he gets mom is holding his hand. He's cutting the vegetables with the knife, and he knows the context for the knife. He gets to play with the knife, play, quote unquote, right?
Yeah.
Mom's holding his hand. He's chopping the vegetables. He gets to help, and now he doesn't have the curiosity about the knives anymore. So the next time he wants to play with the knives, the question is not, can I sneak in and play with the knives? The question is, Mom, can I help you cook dinner tonight?
That's right. Is there something I can chop up with a knife while you help me?
Yeah.
No, that's great.
I want to chop things. Can you, know, and he's got a context for it.
Yeah.
And so we try to apply that kind of thinking for our kids all the time. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's wonderful. I think that's a very powerful redirecting method that is good for people to learn, again, especially as parents of young kids or step parents of young kids, because it's easy to just say no, but eventually you're either going to, like you said, you're going to have your back turned and they're going to do it anyway, or you're going to do like I did, which was just to blow up at my kids and be like, absolutely not, and just scare them into not doing it. But what kind of long-term damage is that going to do? Whereas, like what you just mentioned, that kind of approach where you go, yes, we can use the knives, but only in this context. But if you want to, absolutely, we'll do that. And that way you take away the curiosity, you teach them the proper way to use it, you drastically lower the chances that they're going to try to go do it behind your back. I think those are all very, very good things for, again, parents or step-parents of young kids. That's a great way to think about that.
And what's fun is my kid's 10 now, and he's quite the little chef.
I believe it. That's right.
Yeah, and he'll cook a whole meal for you if you ask him to, and he can do it unsupervised at this point, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Yeah, which is really cool.